Hello, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Curtain with Broadway Award Season nominees. My name is Katharine Quinn. I'm a Broadway strategist and founder of And That's Showbiz, and I am honored to be here today talking to Tony nominees. So, without further ado, let's get started. Nominated for Best Orchestrations for Just in Time, we have the co-orchestrator, music supervisor, arranger, and conductor, Andrew Resnick. Hello.
Hello.
And co-orchestrator Michael Thurber.
Hey.
And we have nominated for Best Sound Design of a Play for Good Night and Good Luck, sound designer Daniel Kluger.
Hi there.
How's it going, everyone?
I
Congrats on
got
your nominations, everyone.
Hey,
Um,
Catherine.
what was your reaction? Anyone can go, but what was your reaction when you first learned that you were nominated?
Well, I'll start with mine. I was just happy that Andrew never fired me. Because it could have happened at any moment. He reminded me today that it still could happen.
It's
It's
still
still not too
possible.
late.
Yeah, we haven't made a final decision yet.
Yeah.
So we're
It
So far,
feels
so
like
good.
it's working. So,
see which
like,
how this goes today.
Yeah, this is the test.
okay, fair, fair. Anyone else? Reactions, first reactions?
it, it was really cool and surprising. And I was on FaceTime with my girlfriend, and she took a screenshot of when I found out. And there was no guard or mask up. It was just kind of a pure jubilant face. And then the drummer of my show was the first person to call me, and I'm like, "Why are you the first person to call me?" And
They're
It's
nice.
coming in hot.
Jared, and then, but then I spoke with my family, and it was really nice.
And I really agree with the thank God I didn't get fired feeling. Like it's a real thing because you're just on, I don't know, I feel like working on this stuff is so hard when you're on pins and needles just trying to figure it out. So there's really um a very particular warm feeling of relief when not only you got away with it, but like people thought it was okay.
I have to piggyback on that. So because I'm also part of the Thank God I Wasn't Fired club. In that, when we were originally setting out to do the orchestrations, they gave us 11 band members to perform what is essentially a big band sound, which is 17, 18, not even including strings. And I was like, is this going to work? And very afraid. And even after like the first band rehearsal, I'm like, Michael, is it going to be okay? Are we going to be okay? And then we got to the theater. I was like, Michael, are we going to be okay? And he's like, yes, it's good. But so I think there was a sense of real relief when, yeah, yes, relief.
Yeah, and we're lucky to do it together. It's because we don't. I mean, we both write and orchestrate other things by ourselves, and so when you get to do it together, you can talk each other off the ledge. Everybody has that moment where you're just like, oh, what did we do? And
Yeah.
luckily, we never hit it at the same time.
No,
it was always
and
an opposite time.
and that's really why I brought you on.
There you go. Yeah,
It
see, I
wasn't-
knew I had a role.
It wasn't really for any sort of musical expertise. It
No.
was just someone to be like, "Or am I okay?"
Yeah,
And
well,
he did great.
It's a well-paid therapist position.
Daniel's like burying his face in his hands, being like, I'm
Oh,
alone.
he's so alone.
That's what associates are for. You've got a team, right?
I had an amazing team, and I agree. It's much better to work in groups.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Where in the season did everyone's shows open? When did Just in Time open? When did Good Night and Good Luck open?
Want to go, Daniel?
First week in April.
Okay. So you had a little buffer. And Just in Time,
We were right at we opened maybe the day before the Tony cut off. So
that's
I
crazy.
think it was like the 26th was like our actual press opening of April.
So that week for you was nuts.
That week was nuts, and then I think it was like that. Was it the next Tuesday or the Tuesday out?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Have
Yeah.
you recovered mentally?
Oh,
No,
no.
because we're all still in the sprint.
Well, the race is just beginning.
I know, I know, I know. But what is, I mean, I'm totally going off script, so hope that's kosher. But like, is there active work? I mean, this is a naive question, but is there active work happening on each of those shows still post being frozen, post, are you prepping for anything? Well, Daniel, I mean, the CNN of it all, I don't know what congrats.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
just saw
coolest
that. Cool.
ever. Live streaming a Broadway play, like the stuff of dreams. Um, but yeah, I mean, does the work continue after freezing, after opening, after Tony noms?
Yes. So I was waiting
What
for
is,
Dan.
what does that look like?
I mean, I know for our show, it's. I mean, most of the hard work is done, but I'm still making small orchestrational tweaks just because I'm hearing things differently, and also, at this point, also in the process, we're introducing subs into the band, and so it's
Mm.
always a constant trying to tune up and trying to get things to sound as good as they can. But I mean, in terms of the heavy lifting, that's all done. But there's also like now like TV appearances, which you have to kind of reorchestrate and redo, and then there's something new every week.
Well, and also Andrew is that special kind of masochist that's there conducting the show every night. So my thing always as like a writer and an orchestrator is like after freeze, I get out of like I just can't take it anymore. I'm like I gotta get out because I'm starting to go crazy. But Andrew's still there, so I'm sure things are changing all the
All the
time.
time. Yeah.
It's wild. Have you all announced an album?
I don't think anything's been announced,
Great.
and
I look forward to hopefully hearing really exciting news in the not
in
too
the
distant.
future, potentially.
Great. I would love that. I think
Maybe.
that'd be great. Okay, Andrew and Michael, Just in Time has been 8 years in the making, with the show originally starting as a 92nd Street Y lyrics and lyricist concert, which I did not know. How did your involvement begin?
Well, yeah, I mean, so we Andrew and I had just met the year before that. We were both doing one act off Broadway musicals on this series that had three one act musicals. And Andrew was music directing one, and then I wrote one for myself that I was performing in. And we shared a dressing room. And right away on the first day, it was just like, oh, we're going to be friends. Like, we have to do this. And we listened to all the same music, and we would sit in the dressing room and just like,
Listen to gospel.
yeah,
And
and like look at scores of like concertos and stuff and like just nerding out. And so then like I think it was probably just like 9 months after that you were working with
I was
Groff.
working with Groff on a project, and then he contacted me because he was doing this concert at the 96th Street Y and saying, "Hey, I'm doing this night about Bobby Darin songs. Do you want to music direct it?" And I didn't know who Bobby Darin was. I no, I knew Splish Splash, I knew Mac
Yeah.
and Knight, but I didn't put that together with Bobby Darin. But
Hmm.
it was Groff, and he's the best to work with. And so I said, yeah, let's do it. And then, pretty soon we realized we were kind of writing a musical. It just kind of happened that way, where it was supposed to just be kind of a presentation. I'm like, and then Bobby did this, and here's a song from that era. But it turned into something more because, Alex Timbers was leading it, and he had
He wasn't involved from that early concert though, was he?
Yeah, yes, he was.
Wow.
He came on for that concert. It was me, Groff, Timbers, and then Ted Chapin. It was his kind of initial idea to have a night of this, but it was really Timbers, Groff, and me who were just kind of forming this thing and having no idea where it was leading or what it was going to be,
Mm.
and we were putting it all together. And then at some point, I was like, "Oh, I'd love some help putting these charts together." And I remembered Michael from the dressing room, and and knew that he had such a wide knowledge of different genres, and seemed like a good person to work with. I was incorrect, but it seemed that way.
It all went downhill after that.
And so then I brought him on, and then he also played bass for the performance. And so he was kind of really in the soup pretty much, shortly after I was, and then that was the beginning. There's more to go. I'm also very cognizant. I want to hear Dan just speak in general about anything really.
Okay. Well, you've been teed up, Dan. Now you have to tell us how you got involved with Good Night and Good Luck.
Uh, that's awesome that you guys met in the trenches.
Yeah, I think even off Broadway was being generous.
It was off
it was
Broadway.
off Broadway, and
Yeah.
you could even add one more.
Yeah. It was far off. Broadway is actually, it was just off, and
Somewhere
then
in the galaxy.
It was just off.
It is beautiful though, because I mean I want to get to know you guys better. It's like it's rare that you get to form relationships with people who do like your exact job. So that's special when that happens. I this is my 10th show at the director David Cromer, so that's how I
Wow.
got brought on. And it all, there were no productions before this one. They had been doing readings and kicking the idea around for years, but yeah, it was this is the first production, so not a ton of history. Although I, of course, had seen the movie. So yeah,
Are you permitted to talk about the CNN of it all? Do you know like what your attachment
honestly, I think
is?
it's come together so quick. I don't really know
Yeah.
to say about it, except it's super exciting that like more people will see it. And um, it's funny. I was nervous. I was like, oh no, is it going to translate? Like, what am I responsible for? Like, I think they have an amazing live broadcast team, but I was watching the old Mary Martin Peter Pan with my daughter last weekend, and it's like super grainy and the sound is really bad. And I realized like, oh, so many people have fallen in love with shows through a
Mm.
really filtered bad medium of it being, I was like, okay, this is gonna be fine. This is like a beautiful tradition of people watching something live at home. So I think, yeah, it's exciting. I wish it
I
had more.
well, hopefully this will be an inciting catalyst for more of it because I totally agree, and it certainly beats watching a bootleg. Um,
Yeah, you guys are such a big hit too that I can't afford tickets to come see it. So I'm excited
thank
that I can
goodness.
see
Thank
it.
goodness it's
Yeah.
yeah, being
I
live
wanted you
streamed.
to be a part
Truly.
of this panel so that we
Yeah,
could
we
ask
can
you for
sneak in. Yeah,
tickets.
like, hey, hook us up, man.
Each show has its own musical identity. How did Michael and Andrew, how did you approach defining the sonic world of Just in Time through orchestration?
Yeah, that was the whole thing.
That was the whole thing. Yeah, that's a really great question too. Thank you for that insightful question because I feel like Dan, I feel like you could speak to this big time. Because Dan did some of my favorite orchestrations that I've ever heard on Broadway for Oklahoma a few
In the
years ago
same theater.
Uh,
in the same theater.
yeah,
And
Circle and Square.
yeah,
Oh, thanks.
and I really mean that. And yeah, and it's such a misunderstood thing. I feel like music in general, on Broadway is such a misunderstood thing. It's almost like a dark art, and yet it's like the most important thing that makes a show work or not. So I appreciate the question. I mean, it was the whole thing, I think, in a nutshell, and you could speak to this as well, like, was how do we like honor Bobby Darin's original recordings and also make it feel like it's 2025? Because I think that's like the whole thing with the jukebox musical is like people want to come and hear the songs they know, but they also want to hear a new spin on them. And
Mm.
obviously a lot of that is Groff because people would listen to him sing the phone book, and so it's really fun to hear his take on it. But musically, the other thing about Darin's catalog is that it's incredibly diverse. He really was a pretty radical artist, especially at that time, to go from like doo-wop, like very bubblegum pop at that time, to then become a big band crooner, to then put out a folk record and actually be really successful in all those different lanes. And so that was the challenge, is how do we do each of these things authentically and also put our own twist on it, especially with the big band thing. I feel like that's a major place, like in our Venn diagram as musicians, that overlaps as sort of like sacred musical ground.
Mm.
There's some of the best composers in the history of music were big band writers, and so how do you honor that with only six horns and also try to put like a modern zhuzh on it? So it took a lot of revisions and back and forth.
Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth. And I think the other element that we were really trying to capture was, part of what made Bobby Darin so electric. It was his live performance, and that's what everybody says, and that's what we're kind of trying to capture in the show is come see, Jonathan Groff, really
Bit.
like make this place explode, right? And so like that's the energy we're like really trying to capture in the song. So if you only honor what's in the recordings, there's going to be a bit of a kind of staid, perhaps we want to, again, as Michael said, like really honor what was there, and at the same time make it feel like this is happening for the first time and only time in this room right now. And so I know I drew a lot of inspiration from a lot of his live recordings too, where, he would depart sometimes very radically from what he had recorded earlier, and using, a lot of those ideas. And then also just, between Michael and I, there we like a lot of different genres of music, and we're kind of able to bring ourselves into it as well. Um,
That's awesome. I'm impressed. I certainly couldn't do it. Um, Dan, we were talking about earlier your orchestrations as well, and so I'm curious, like, which hat came first, and what is the relationship for you between those hats of orchestrator and sound designer?
I feel lucky that I get to do both things in my life. Yeah, I mean they're related jobs with different puzzle pieces and tools. I, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a jazz pianist, and then I kind of fell into theater doing just piano accompaniment work. And sometimes I feel like the fundamentals are you are trying to be present to theater is so experimental and collaborative. Even when you're following a formula, like people start rehearsal processes and shows with hunches, and a lot of it is not figured out. So the job of a creative musician is to show up and like try to be present to, you're trying to really get the alchemy right of elements that are scrappy and limited and fast, and you're trying to be present to them so you can calibrate things and keep the hair on people's arms standing up, and I don't know. So that wasn't really to answer your question. Like, I don't know. I was doing music for shows, and then it's pretty common that in theater the musicians will get asked to do sound design as very frequently in theater. So I kind of fell into sound design accidentally, but there's a lot of creative relationships where like that's a big part of what I'm doing. So and then in this show, the question of how the music was going to function was really particular because the movie had this score played by a live band in the film that's like recording jazz records in another room in the CBS studio, and the camera pans through the hallways of the TV studio past the jazz group recording, and so it feels like it belongs there, but it elevates the whole movie and it gives it a sense of a period. And so like George Clooney was committed to having that element function in a similar way in the theater. And so we really had to puzzle through how that was going to live in the theater physically, sonically, and feel real and the right size gesture, if that makes sense. So I have this amazing band led by Brian Carter, who's orchestrator, and he's basically the only guy I know who's like a serious jazz musician and a brilliant theater collaborator as well. So the band is guys that he's played jazz with, and it's all of their first time doing theater except Brian. And they're just like they're crazy, serious jazz musicians. So it gives the whole thing like a unbelievable je ne sais quoi, I think.
I want to just piggyback on a few things Dan said, which is that, I think part of the reason why Just in Time, at least in my mind, why I think it sounds pretty great, and why I think it's successful is because our sound designer, Peter Hylinski, is brilliant, and the way that we worked in tandem and his knowledge of the orchestration, like it, obviously they're very different jobs, and yet we're so interdependent on each other. Without, a really good sound designer, everything gets lost. And so yes, it's very cool that Dan does both. I also thought it was just very interesting what you were saying, Dan, how you want to be a jazz pianist. I grew up wanting to be a classical pianist and a rock drummer. And my guess is Michael, it wasn't something necessarily in theater.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, like, for whether it's because they needed a rehearsal pianist or for whatever reason, we kind of find ourselves in these situations, and it's like, oh, holy shit, this is really collaborative and really rewarding, and really, to what Dan was saying about how often you enter a process without the finished product, and you're like, okay, we're all going to kind of discover this thing together. It speaks to like a real willingness to kind of show up in every moment, and then from that place decide, okay, what is the little next thing that this moment needs. And I'm more and more, I'm finding the place of like, oh, I don't know anything except what I might know in any given moment, and then what I think I might know is 20 minutes later completely obsolete. But that willingness to show up in that way is what I find so rewarding in kind of in terms of doing this work.
Yeah. Another cool thing to point out is, Dan, like that's so dope that you pointed out that you have like real New York City jazz musicians in your show. And Brian and I actually went to college together. We used to play in a combo together at Juilliard. And I think that that's actually really unique that we're on this talk together, because I think that's something our show has in common. Like our band is all New York City jazz musicians, not theater people. And I like, not to sound like soapboxy, but like that's really exciting to me, because like I think my biggest, if I were to say I had like a mission in theater, it's to try to put like the real deal on stage, like to put the absolute best music that real musicians would feel seen by on stage, and it's a really cool season in that way, because you have Dan who's making this space for incredible music to happen, and like you said, like trying to make it feel real. You have Just in Time, you have Buena Vista Social Club. It's a really exciting season because this is not normal for Broadway. And I don't mean that as a, I mean, I love musicals and I love this community. So I really don't mean it as a knock, but this is an incredible season for real music.
Just to, I mean, I'm bumping up against real music, but
Authentic.
I will say, like, everything is up. Like I think like the score for Maybe Happy Ending is beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah.
And like and
awesome.
Authentic, and so like, yeah, I think part of maybe like what we're saying is that, like, with Just in Time, which is so much of it is this jazz, this big band style. Our players, so many of them are like came from like Michael Bublé's big band, and like are not normally people who are on Broadway, and now they get the opportunity, and like they're falling in love with it. They're falling in love with being part of this community, with collaborating in this way, with working with the actors. And I just think the more people involved in this industry, with different breadths of knowledge, the better.
Yeah, additional influences in the theater space.
It's just more ingredients to get mixed up in it, and then more exciting things will emerge.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, Jukebox Musical Land, on arranging and like the arc of a show, where did you all even begin with knowing how to shape the narrative of the piece, how the arrangements interacted with it, and also how the arrangements, like what the color of those arrangements needed to be for those moments?
When we started the show, I think Groff and I gone to a room. This was, by the show I mean back in the 92nd Street Y days, and with the help of Timbers, we kind of figured out, okay, which songs are going to function where, and how are they going to tell the story of Bobby's life, and sometimes lining up with where they happened in his career, sometimes it didn't. And I would say that about 75% of that structure, maybe even a little more, that we established at the 92nd Street Y 8 years ago is still the structure of this show right now. And so, going into, developing it for Broadway, we had a decent sense of how each song was supposed to work from a narrative point of view. from an emotional point of view, and really what the function of each song was. And you have a lot of songs where it's just we're all performing live. You have a few where they're interspersed in scenes, but we just became very, very clear on this is what this song is supposed to do. And then once that is clear, then you use the arrangement of it, and then later on the orchestration to help you know to help crystallize that. But like without really knowing how a song's supposed to function, then it kind of you're a little bit in the dark. And so I think a lot of it speaks to Alex's ideas around like, okay, this song right here, this is going to be him performing in a nightclub. This is going to be, and then from there you have so much more. You just know where you're heading, and then you can make choices based on that.
Love it. Dan, you said you've collaborated with David Cromer how many times?
This is our 10th show.
What is the relationship between director and sound designer? Or did you orchestrate for him well, I guess you did, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a pretty wide-ranging set of shows together. Yeah. I'm hesitant to generalize because I feel like I'm lucky to have like two other director relationships that are sort of long term like that, where um, you can get a lot further without everything needing to be discussed, and you can start to anticipate. Um, you just start to learn. Yeah, I mean, it's like any personal relationship. You just start to learn how the particular organic rhythm of somebody's ideation might play out over a couple of days, so that when you have a what if conversation, you know how to hold what all those eventualities or contingencies might be.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah, that was a succinct and efficient and great answer. Um, I had a follow-up question, actually kind of for all parties here, but like, these are period pieces. They don't live in the 2025 world. So how does it's not an analog sound, but how does the sound of the time that your show is set in impact each of your work?
Yeah, I think I think there's like a play against nostalgia. Like you can decide how you want to work with nostalgia. And like what I mean by that is like there's times where leaning into it is the most exciting and theatrical thing you can do, sort of like what Andrew was saying about like a moment by moment case, and it's like at least in our show, when you have these moments where Bobby Darin Groff is really in the nightclub and really in his nightclub bag and like at his prime performing at the Copa and playing all these big band hits that we know. Those are moments where I feel like people love being there with him. They love feeling like they're at the Copa. And so that's a moment where in our job and in everybody's job in the production, it feels good to lean into that. And then there's other moments where you actually want to play against it, and you're trying to, like, something in the book is humorous in a modern way, which is a great thing about our show, I think, in the work that the book writers did. And so in those moments, you kind of want to try to find a way to reimagine the sound of the music so that it doesn't sound like it's of a period, so it's a mixed bag, but I feel like it's about like playing with and against the time period.
I think in Good Night and Good Luck, the feeling of period is actually pretty crucial on a couple of different levels. Like, obviously, the musical choices are based in, well, so the play set in 1954, and the um, premise of this of a band recording in the CBS studio was just sort of worked through very practically and literally. So the songs would have been songs that they would have been recording, and like Brian thought very deeply about um, which musicians would, be able to drop into um, a kind of historic pastiche without sending it up, um, and they're like crazy improvisers too, and they actually had to work really carefully to just kind of um, dial in the exact temperament and style. And then I think that actually a lot of that comes from the film that is all in black and white and was treated like it has a slow uh, period approach to the cadence of the storytelling. It's a thriller, but it's not that it's laid back, but the pacing of the story and the dialogue is allowed to unfold in a period style as well. And so the music doesn't have to provide the sort of adrenaline and overstimulation that we expect music to do now. It was really able to um, follow its own terms within the world of the 50s. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's easy to do that badly too, but I don't know. I was inspired by the Ripley TV show last year that was like um, really slow and laid back. And I don't know. There's something about like suspense with no music and the way we used to just take our time to watch things that took a little bit longer. That I feel like it's really important to the show that we made.
Cool. It feels very brave to pace things that way, especially now. So I think that like it does have the effect of a thrill, even if you don't think that it's going to.
And just to be
Um,
clear,
yeah, please.
our show is not paced that way. In the exact opposite way.
Yeah, I'm jealous, Dan.
Yeah,
that sounds awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like what? That sounds so cool.
That's like my taste as a movie watcher. You know what I mean?
It's
But
like
but I
letting
wound up in the
slowly
musical
unfold.
theater racket.
Yeah,
so.
no, it's just
Louder, faster, funnier.
Yeah,
we're just going.
exactly. Yeah, button.
We have a lot of buttons in this show.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrew, you wore multiple hats on Just in
Yeah.
Time. You served as co-orchestrator, music supervisor, arranger, and conductor. So, how does juggling all those roles help shape your perspective on the score, and how does each role influence the other?
Um, uh, the biggest thing was having having to understand how music was functioning in this show, and from there that kind of helps inform every decision I have to make from whichever hat I'm wearing in any given moment. I mean, the conducting is so that's mainly what I've been doing on Broadway, but like that was kind of the last puzzle piece here. I wasn't even really thinking about it until after we opened, because up until opening I was out in the house making tweaks and things like that. But most of it was just really from the get-go trying to crack what each moment was going to be musically in the show. And just to be very clear, I didn't know what that was going to be most of the time. I think there's some demystification that is helpful in that. Like, it's not like I'm like, oh, I know exactly what it is. It's so much trial and error. It's so much like, picking up on little glimmers of, oh, it might be that, and then building off of that. But many ways it's whatever title it is, they all became pretty interchangeable. And it was just, one musical decision after the next that was coming from the place of like, how is this helping serve the story? Is this helping serve, what Groff is doing on stage, the thing that Timbers is trying to accomplish? And it's more like so they happen almost simultaneously and linearly at the same time, where like the arrangements happen for the orchestrations, and then the conducting is the final bringing it into the actual live material world. And on some level, like I'll be like, I don't know what this arrangement should be, but maybe there should be a clarinet here, and then that'll influence the arrangement. So it's I haven't, I don't know how any of it happens. That anything happens is a miracle.
People say it all the time, and it's true.
Yeah.
But it sounds like all of your roles are in active conversation with one another, and they all inform each other.
Yeah, and I think just the other part of it is like learning. The process was learning to listen to myself on like a deeper and deeper level, and like being willing to be like, oh, if I wasn't feeling something was quite right, it's really easy to be like, it's fine, or like maybe I'm being so and so, but to actually like really listen to the discomfort that would like come up with like something not being right, and actually receive that internal guidance and be like, okay, well, you know what, maybe there is a way to just tighten it up a bit, or whatever. But like for me, that was the biggest process, the part of the process that was kind of growth inducing, was just actually really starting to tune into my internal compass in a way, and going from there.
Hmm.
It's humbling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And impressive. Daniel, you supervise the mix of every element in production, including music. So how did you approach blending all those layers to serve the story without overwhelming it?
We had to work a lot with scale and dynamics because the a lot of the dialogue is actually quite conversational and intimate, and there's also foreground and background stuff. So there's a company of a dozen people, and then the scene will be like a tiny aside, and it's not whispered, but that it's always really important to David Cromer that human behavior is legible around the theater, but that it's human sized. And so, and then this is like a massive theater. So we had to figure out how that was going to be amplified naturally, subtly, but around the space. And then Clooney's on camera sometimes, and we're kind of moving between this point of view where the audience is like in the room with the human beings, and we want it to feel almost like not amplified, or sneaky and subtle, and you want to feel like you're in the room with them. And then there's a big projection screen, and we want to feel like we're watching a mediated um, television. And then the band as well, sometimes we want to feel like they are also human beings in the studio, and so we want the music to feel almost acoustic, and then also it has to be loud and cover transitions. So there's a lot of going, and also things in a show can't go between super loud and super soft. Like you have to make a kind of cohesive experience. So the way we play with that, your expectations about how that scale works is that was what was challenging about it. So yeah,
Sounds complicated, Dan.
It's this
it
wild.
is a little tricky. It's just like, yeah, it's hard to go from a quiet thing to a loud thing. And the technology for amplifying dialogue is so wonderful now that you can do a lot with delay and spatialization. So you can actually make things quite loud, but still feel like they're naturally coming from the source. So that is actually the main tool for getting everything to live in the same dynamic range, but still feel like, okay, it's three-dimensional. I'm in it.
Wild. Michael and Andrew,
Yeah.
were there any specific instruments or orchestral textures used to help define a particular character or setting in the show? And do you have a favorite?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is a great one. We had a whole thing with timbers about flutes in the show because we were trying to do this exact thing of like trying to look for like how to identify different characters sonically. And so for one character in particular, we were leaning a lot on a few things: acoustic guitar, celeste, and flutes. And it was so funny because Timbers was just like, why are these flutes
Why
in the
do you
show?
love the flutes so much?
And we were like, look, man, it's a real thing. Like Broadway, like our big bands actually, doubled the woodwinds would double on flutes and clarinet and stuff. And so I think probably 80% of the flutes got cut, but
Cut.
there's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
20% that are
So
there's
funny.
some great
But
flute
none
moments.
of them are with the character that we
No,
initially assigned the flute
wound
for.
up in a totally different
She
thing.
doesn't have any flute anymore.
Yeah. Then
Uh,
the one other one I would say that did make it into the show that I think is really cool is there's a character of the sister
yeah.
in the show. And at that point, we're far enough into the show by the time that she has her song that we've already heard like a lot of our trick bag was used up. We've had like this really big, glorious big band thing. We've had a beautiful ballad big band sound. We've done a lot of the 50s songs, so we've heard a lot of the doo-wop, like electric guitar thing. And we were a little bit at a loss for like, how do we make this character in this moment sound unique? And what we landed on was actually less, which sort of like to your point, Dan, about like pacing things. It was a moment where we thought like maybe the most dramatic thing we could do is actually go for a much smaller, much stripped down song. So without getting too in the weeds of music nerd land, what we did was we took the chords, the chordal instruments out of that song. So the texture is just really bass and drums and then horns playing just a really simple
Most of it's just
line.
one horn.
Yeah.
One horn on like kind of a thumb line, and then and that yeah, we took out what normally holds the fort down.
And that felt like a really nice breath of fresh air and makes her feel much more unique.
That's awesome. Okay, this is for everybody. In your shows, are there any subtle choices or details that you're especially proud of that audiences might not consciously notice?
Ooh.
Well,
Like, maybe looking
I'm
out for or listening for.
the first one that comes to mind for me is like we we both have our big band influences, and some of them are the same and some of them are different. And personally, I'm a huge Quincy Jones head. And so there's a couple moments, like especially towards the end of the show, where we wanted to really kind of go for like a more modern sound. And so it was like, well, what kind of like licks, like what kind of big band figures should we have? Because we'd already done like the Nelson Riddle thing a whole bunch of times. And so there's a couple shout outs to like Quincy's early stuff that I feel like, five people in the world would even know that that was like a nod to him. But I like it.
That's awesome.
This is more a general thing, but one of the things that kind of helped update the sound in general was kind of taking some of the rhythm section parts, the guitar, the bass, and the drums, and not necessarily doing exactly what was done on the records, but kind of infusing them a bit with the knowledge of the last few decades. And so, if they're just kind of very subtle differences between what we're doing and what you hear on the record. But if you pick up on them, you're like, oh, it does feel a little more a little today,
Yeah.
in a way. And that's true of most of the moments. I'll think more as Dan responds.
One of the things I'm most proud of that's not super apparent is that the show has a lot of vintage studio microphones in it, and they're all real functioning microphones. They're not props. And that sort of happened by accident because I just and I don't know that we had to do it that way. But the play is about these guys working in this TV news studio where like TV news was 3 years old as a medium, right? And they built this makeshift studio in this room above Grand Central Station. And there's like I don't know, they're just like a tact, and the guys and the reporters are also engineers. Like there's just which is actually that's still true for journalists now. Like they still actually have to be techs as well. But there's just like a tactile. There's something about the labor of them working with their gear that was really important to the story. And we were able to use some vintage microphones from this studio that I work in. And my studio mate Ian Kagi, who runs Renaissance Recording, happens to be like one of he came up as a studio tech, so he was able to like repair some vintage microphones and rent them to the production, and it just gives the whole thing like um, a color and a quality that we could have faked some other way, but it was so much easier and effective to use the real thing, and so I'm proud of that.
Andrew, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, but then I was also listening to what Dan was saying, and so my
Yeah, our vintage microphones are fake in our show,
Yeah,
so we're just sucking it up.
Wow.
Man,
It's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, they're just like a few moments here and there that I really love. One in particular, it's at the end of the show. Jonathan sings "The Curtain Falls," and it starts with this little piano intro. And just for me, I kind of get to do whatever I want on any given night. But there's a little lick in it, and if you listen, you can probably hear it. It's like this little lick in thirds, and I did it. It's on the recording, and I did it at the 92nd Street Y. He would always look over at me because it was the end of the show during that moment, and we still make eye contact during that little moment. 8 years later, and so if you're in the audience, you can look for that or not.
I love it. I love it. All right, I've got a final question, which is, looking back, what do your Tony nominations mean to you personally? And what do you hope audiences take away from your musical and sound contributions? It's a big one.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm just really thankful. I think Dan and I know each other a little bit, not super well, but I know we've talked and hung a little bit before. And Andrew and I have known each other for a long time, and I know that I can say for all three of us, we just work really hard, and we're all really serious about what we do. And so you just kind of keep your head down, and you're just working all the time. And so when a moment comes where the industry, especially with the Tony, which is unique amongst the other awards like Grammys and Oscars and stuff, because it's such a small industry. It really is your colleagues that are saying, "Hey, good job," and that feels really nice. And the only thing I hope from it is that it makes it easier for me to try to keep pursuing things that I'm passionate about. That's really the only reason that I care about it, is that if it makes it easier to keep making stuff, I'll take it. That's awesome.
I know for me, it does mean a lot because kind of to circle back to where we started when Dan was like the relief he felt with the nomination, and how we're not sure how things are going to work. If you'd asked me a decade ago, I never would have thought I would I could orchestrate a Broadway show, let alone one that was so big band heavy. And so then like that becomes a kind of form of identity in a way, and it becomes an I can't. And then you invest belief into that, and I think it's just yet another reminder to, like, you don't always have to believe your thoughts, and that with a lot of Michael said that, like, a lot of hard work, a lot of like really digging into the genre, into the history, into the conventions, and then the rule breakings of big band writing, and was able to do something that I wasn't sure I would have been able to do years ago. And so that means a lot, and I hope that every person just finds their own version of that. And I also just, so much love went into making the music and the arrangements, and for me, the end of the show, we have this big medley at the end, and um, seeing the like true joy on people's faces, and like especially people of an older generation who might not be the most mobile, but like stand up and start clapping and dancing. It's really, really rewarding. And I leave every show not exhausted, but kind of uplifted and exhilarated. So and the music speaks for itself. It's really joyous, fun music that Bobby left us with. So it's really been an immense privilege.
All right, Daniel.
Nice. Well, I second all of that. Yeah, these are like surreal moments of gratitude, and I don't know. It's it does, words do fail you because you kind of realize how special it is to get to do it, let alone get to reflect back on it and have the opportunity to celebrate it with the people you worked with. And um, yeah, I'm gonna go kind of nerdy on this, which is I feel like I really got to test out the limits of subtle amplification in this show, and I really hope because I feel like plays are in a really interesting space on Broadway where sometimes you need to make plays very loud so that every word is heard, and it can start to feel unnatural. And then on the other end, you can sometimes people shy away from amplifying plays because they don't want that experience. They don't want to feel like it's coming from that the sound is coming from the speakers, and you don't have this connection to the actors. And so like um the community of sound designers and engineers who's really been like tackling that problem for dialogue in plays is it's dozens of people who are iterating that every time there's a play, and they're always trying to figure out like, well, how do we get it louder but still feel like the sound is coming from the human body. That that is it's a really we're just in a very exciting moment for that technology. And my associate Will Pickens was like really, really thoughtful and careful about how to approach every single moment with like real attention to detail. So I just hope that and we did that in a really big theater that kind of breaks it. We tested, there are moments that still don't work, and there are parts of the theater that are still like really tricky. And I just hope that like for the sound people, that it's just a kind of proof of concept of like, okay, we can keep making this even better.
Listen, I came into this conversation impressed by all of you and your work, and I am leaving an even greater fan. So thank you so, so much for your time. It is all the time that we have today. So thank you, Andrew, Michael, and Daniel, for being here with us to discuss your incredible work, and congrats again on the Tony nominations. And thank you, everyone watching, and to Impact 24 PR for putting this panel together. And we'll see you in the next conversation.